Deep beneath a quiet patch of forest floor, or tucked into a crack in a city sidewalk, there is a world running on rules we are only beginning to understand. It has no ruler in the way we imagine rulers. It has no blueprint pinned to a wall, no meeting where decisions get made, no single mind steering the ship. And yet, builds cities. It wages wars. It farms. It nurses its sick. It even performs kind of surgery. This is the world inside an ant colony, and once you understand how it actually works, you will never look at the ground the same way again. Let's start with the biggest misconception most people carry around, usually without even realizing it. We tend to picture the queen ant as something like a monarch, barking orders from a throne room deep in the nest, directing her subjects where to go and what to do. It's an easy image to fall into because it matches the word queen. But biologically, that picture is almost completely wrong. The queen is not a general, but a reproductive organ. The colony functions not through top-down control, but through distributed, responsive coordination. She doesn't command the workers. In most species, she barely interacts with them at all beyond being fed and groomed. Her entire job, essentially, is to lay eggs, sometimes thousands of them in a single day, and be the genetic engine that keeps the colony's population flowing. The real decision-making, the real intelligence of the colony, happens somewhere else entirely, spread across thousands or even millions of individual ants, none of whom has any idea what the big picture plan actually is. Science news today. This is where scientists reach for a word that sounds almost like science fiction: superorganism. Just as an individual ant has different body parts that work together, an ant superorganism has multiple colony members that cooperate to accomplish extraordinary feats. Think about your own body for a second. Your heart, no, your lungs exist. Your liver isn't in communication with your kneecap. And yet, somehow, all of these separate parts, none of which understands the whole, combine to produce something coherent. You, walking, thinking, breathing, living. Biologists increasingly argue that an ant colony works on the exact same principle, just scaled up from cells to individual insects. Each ant is less like a tiny independent creature making its own life choices and more like a single cell in a much larger body, one that happens to be spread out across an entire nest instead of packed into a single skin. Ask a biologist. This isn't just a comparison. It shows up in real, measurable biology. Researchers studying colony metabolism have found that ant colonies behave energetically the way a single living body does. Individual ants of larger colonies consume and use less energy than their counterparts in smaller colonies, while smaller colonies tend to live faster, die younger, and burn through more energy, mirroring patterns we see in the metabolic rates of individual animals as they grow larger or smaller. In other words, the whole colony behaves like it has its own metabolism, its own aging curve, its own life history, separate from any single ant inside it. A colony can, in a very real sense, be born, grow, mature, and eventually die, even as generation after generation of individual worker ants live and die inside it, each one only ever seeing a tiny sliver of the whole. Science Daily. Perhaps the most startling demonstration of this superorganism idea comes from how colonies respond to danger. Imagine a predator, say a hungry bird or a curious mammal, disturbs a column of ants somewhere out on the edge of their territory. What happens next isn't chaos. It isn't every ant for itself. Researchers who deliberately simulated predator attacks on ant colonies found something remarkable. The ants reacted differently depending on exactly where in the colony's structure the disturbance occurred, almost like a body reacting to different types of pain. The researchers described this as ants reacting differently, and in a coordinated fashion, to perceived predator attacks depending on their location, concluding that the findings support the superorganism concept, since the whole society reacts much like a single organism responding to attacks on different parts of its body. When ants were removed from the outer edges of a foraging trail, the colony pulled back that section, almost like flinching away from a wound. But when workers vanished from deep inside the nest, near the colony's core, the response flipped entirely. Instead of retreating, the ants outward, abandoning the area as though the whole structure had caught fire and needed to be evacuated. Scientists drew a direct comparison here to how a hand yanks back from a hot stove, and how people flee outward from a burning house, arguing that these two very different reactions mirror the nervous response systems found in individual organisms. No single ant understood the danger to the whole colony. Each one was simply following local rules, reacting to its immediate surroundings and the signals of the ants around it. And yet, out of thousands of these small, local reactions, an intelligent, body-like defensive response emerged. Science alert. So how does this actually work moment to moment? If there's no central command, how do thousands of ants avoid simply running into each other in confusion? The answer lies in something surprisingly simple: chemistry. Ants communicate primarily through pheromones, chemical signals laid down as they move, deposited on the ground, brushed onto each other's antennae, exchanged mouth to mouth in a behavior called trophallaxis, which is essentially a form of food and information sharing rolled into one. When a forager finds a promising source of food, she doesn't run back to file a report with management. She simply walks home, laying down a faint chemical trail as she goes. Other ants crossing that trail pick up the scent and are drawn to follow it. If the food source is good, more ants make the trip, each one reinforcing the trail with their own pheromones, and the path grows stronger and more attractive over time. If the food runs out, ants stop making the trip, the trail's chemical signal naturally fades away, and the path disappears as though it had never existed. Nobody decided to abandon the trail. It simply stopped being reinforced and evaporated. This is what scientists call emergent behavior, and it might be the single most important concept for understanding how any of this works. No individual ant is smart enough to plan a foraging network, defend a nest, or manage a food supply chain. Each ant is, frankly, not very intelligent at all on its own. It's following a small set of simple rules. Follow this scent, avoid that scent, respond to this vibration, react to this touch. But when you multiply those simple rules across thousands or millions of individuals, all interacting with each other constantly, incredibly complex, adaptive, almost eerily intelligent behavior emerges from the group as a whole. It's the same underlying principle behind flocks of birds twisting through the sky without colliding, or schools of fish forming shapes that seem choreographed. Nobody's charge. The pattern appears. This distributed intelligence becomes especially clear when you look at how colonies manage their own workforce. Worker ants aren't randomly assigned jobs. Colonies show something researchers describe as task allocation, a kind of internal division of labor where different ants specialize in different roles: nursing the brood, foraging for food, defending the nest, excavating tunnels, or tending to the queen. What's remarkable is how flexible this system is. If a colony suddenly loses a large number of foragers, say to a predator or a storm, other ants can shift roles to compensate, moving from nursing duties into foraging duties, almost like a factory reallocating workers to a suddenly understaffed department. This isn't managed by any single overseeing ant tracking the numbers. It emerges from ants sensing local conditions, chemical signals, contact rates, and the general busyness of the nest around them, and adjusting their own behavior accordingly. And then there's the astonishing complexity of what these colonies actually build and maintain. Some ant species construct nests that rival human architecture in their sophistication, with ventilation shafts specifically angled to regulate air and temperature, chambers dedicated to specific purposes like nurseries for larvae, storage rooms for food, and even designated waste areas kept separate from living spaces, functioning almost like a sanitation system. Leafcutter ants, one of the most famous examples in the insect world, don't actually eat the leaves they cut and carry. Instead, they use those leaf fragments to cultivate a specific type of fungus deep inside their nest, essentially running an agricultural operation, farming a crop they've cultivated and protected for millions of years, long before humans ever domesticated a single plant. The fungus, in turn, cannot survive outside the care of the ants. It's a relationship of total mutual dependence, evolved and refined over an almost unimaginable span of time. Even more surprising to most people is how ants handle health and disease within the colony. Living in such dense, close quarters, with thousands of bodies constantly touching, sharing food, and moving through the same tunnels, would seem like a recipe for disaster if disease ever took hold. And colonies do face this risk constantly. But research has shown that ants have evolved sophisticated behavioral strategies to manage it. Colonies employ grooming behaviors, immune responses, and behavioral defenses against parasites and pathogens to mitigate these risks. Some species will actually quarantine sick individuals, physically isolating infected ants away from the rest of the colony, or in some documented cases, ants have even been observed performing what looks remarkably like triage, tending to injured nestmates in ways that improve their chances of survival, essentially practicing a rudimentary form of first aid. This isn't compassion in the way we understand it emotionally. It's a set of evolved behaviors that improve the survival odds of the colony as a whole, but the effect looks, from the outside, remarkably like care. Insect lore. What's especially interesting is how differently individual colonies can behave from one another, even within the exact same species. You might assume that if you've seen one ant colony, you've essentially seen them all, that their behavior is just hardwired and identical across the board. But research says otherwise. Studies of tree-dwelling ant colonies have found consistent behavioral differences between colonies, differences scientists could place on a scale ranging from aggressive to docile. Some colonies are simply bolder and more defensive than others, consistently, over time, almost like a colony-level personality. And in at least one striking case, the trees hosting more aggressive ant colonies suffered less leaf damage from other insects, suggesting a colony's temperament can directly shape the health and survival of the very ecosystem it depends on. It raises a genuinely fascinating question that researchers are still exploring. Is the colony's aggressive personality shaping the health of its tree, or is a healthier tree somehow producing a more aggressive colony? Either way, the idea that a colony, as a collective unit made of thousands of individuals, can have something resembling a consistent personality is a genuinely strange and wonderful wrinkle in how we think about identity in nature. Live science, live science. There's also something worth appreciating in just how selfless individual ants tend to be compared to us. Researchers studying colony-wide energy use have pointed out a striking contrast with typical human behavior. As one lead researcher on colony metabolism put it, human behavior is often driven by personal gain, but ants tend to prioritize the needs of the colony over their own individual interests. Each insect adjusts its own energy expenditure in response to its connectivity with the rest of the colony, increasing its effort when its connections to others are reduced, almost though each ant is constantly, silently asking whether the colony needs more from it right now, and adjusting its behavior accordingly, without any instruction telling it to do so. Popular science. Of course, this cooperative superorganism-like behavior isn't purely a force for harmony and order. The same mechanisms that allow ants to coordinate so effectively can sometimes tip into chaos. Researchers note that while the positive reinforcement driving mass cooperative behavior can be beneficial, it can also produce catastrophic outcomes, including mass panic and stampedes within the colony itself. The very same chemical and behavioral feedback loops that let a colony organize a flawless evacuation from danger can, under the wrong conditions, spiral into a self-reinforcing panic that spreads through the nest far faster than any individual ant could have anticipated or controlled. It's a humbling reminder that emergent intelligence isn't automatically wise. It's simply what happens when many simple parts respond to each other in real time, for better or worse. Popular science. Perhaps the most unsettling and fascinating twist in the story of ant colonies involves what happens when colonies of the same species meet each other. You might expect ants from different colonies to simply ignore one another, or perhaps behave in a relatively neutral way, the way two strangers passing on a sidewalk might. That's the case. Colony identity runs deep in the world of ants, chemically encoded into each individual's body through unique scent profiles. Ants from a different colony, even of the exact same species, are typically recognized as intruders and treated with hostility, sometimes explosive, violent hostility. Researchers studying certain invasive ant species have documented exactly this kind of aggression when unrelated colonies encounter each other, particularly in dense urban environments where nesting space and food are limited. Aggression assays demonstrated high levels of aggression in pairings involving workers from different urban colonies and from different natural colonies alike, though notably lower aggression was found in pairings involving queens from different urban colonies. What's even stranger is what can happen next. In controlled colony merging experiments, despite highly aggressive interactions and significant mortality among both workers and queens, all of the colony pairs studied eventually fused together within just 5 days, with fusion typically occurring only after most of the fighting workers had died off and the survivors merged into a single unified colony. It's a brutal process by our standards, violent and costly, and yet it results in something new. Former rivals, and often former strangers, becoming a single cooperative unit, indistinguishable from a colony that had always been one family. Nene. This particular phenomenon helps explain one of the most dramatic developments in the modern ant world: the rise of so-called supercolonies, some of which span extraordinary distances, blurring the line between what we'd normally consider separate colonies entirely. In certain urban and invasive ant populations, instead of small, aggressive, closed-off family units, researchers have documented sprawling networks of interconnected nests, tolerant of each other, cooperating across enormous areas, sometimes covering entire cities or even stretching across international borders. Scientists studying this phenomenon suggest that the growth of a single expanding colony, combined with the merging of multiple previously separate colonies, may work together to produce these massive supercolonies, with both processes potentially happening simultaneously and reinforcing one another. It's a genuinely strange inversion of what we think we know about ants defending fiercely defined territories. Under the right conditions, especially conditions humans have inadvertently created through global trade, shipping, and urban development, the normally rigid walls between ant colonies can dissolve entirely, giving rise to cooperative ant societies on a scale nature likely never intended. Nah. Step back from all of this, and you start to see the outline of something genuinely profound about how life organizes itself. Ants have no internet, no meetings, no managers reading spreadsheets to allocate resources. They have simple bodies, simple senses, and remarkably simple behavioral rules. And yet, from those simple ingredients, layered across thousands or millions of interacting individuals, we get farming, architecture, healthcare, defense strategy, workforce management, and even something that looks unsettlingly like diplomacy and warfare. It's a system that has been quietly running, refining itself, and succeeding for well over 100 million years, long before humans existed to marvel at it. Ants were practicing agriculture, building climate-controlled cities, and organizing complex societies millions of years before the first human ever picked up a tool. Maybe that's the real lesson hidden beneath the sidewalk cracks and forest floors. We tend to associate intelligence, organization, and cooperation with brains, with central planning, with someone or something in charge, making the big calls. But nature offers a quieter, older answer. That order doesn't require a single mind to design it. It can emerge, slowly and reliably, out of countless small interactions between individuals who understand almost nothing about the whole. In that sense, the ant colony isn't just an oddity of the insect world. It's a working demonstration of one of the deepest patterns in biology, a pattern that shows up again and again, from cells building bodies to neurons building minds to, perhaps, in its strange insect way, ants building something remarkably like a civilization, one pheromone trail, one small decision, one tiny individual at a time.